Hello, and welcome to this special presentation by the Common Core Institute on the National Pathway for Common Core Implementation. My name is Kevin Baird. I'm the chairman here at the Institute, and today we'd like to help our districts understand better the National Pathway, updated in the fall of 2012, getting a good sense of how to measure their current progress and an understanding of what they might need to do next. Much of the materials that I use today are drawn from the graduate program called Common Core Black Belt Certification, offered by the Institute and the University of Southern California, Rossier School of Education. So we're going to be speaking about the National Pathway and then measuring our implementation progress. One lens that we might look at for measuring our progress is the pathway itself. The pathway says that we need to build our mastery for change over time. Also building strong capacity for sustainability. We begin with our core teams. We call them black belts. These are individuals who will spend a year or more in deep study, understanding the standards, the research behind them, and then how to implement them. For instance, in building common assessment items, performance tasks, model lessons. From the Black Belt core team, we then begin working with our lead coaches and teachers through a process which we call school certification. School certification brings all of our faculty eventually to an understanding of the key priority elements and then going deeper into fluency for actual implementation in the classroom of the standards and the instructional practices that they require. We also begin working with our building leadership teams, ensuring that they understand what they need to be looking for, what the observables are, what those practices are, not just knowing what they are, but being able to actually coach, to demonstrate, to model. For instance, key discussion practices or key elements of rigorous classroom management or facilitation. You might ask yourself, where are you on the pathway? You have your black belts moving? Have you started working with your lead coaches and your teachers? Have you started building all of your faculty up through the school certification process? Are you working with your building leadership teams? Another lens that we might use to evaluate our progress and understand what to do next is the lens of successful implementation for sustainable change. There are 5 critical elements for sustainable change. The first is vision. So we might ask, where are we relative to the implementation of a vision of college and career readiness? Not a vision of the standards, not a vision of Common Core implementation, not a vision of classroom observation or Marzano or Danielson or any of those pieces, but that overriding coherence lens of college and career readiness that brings together, kind of like glue, all of these pieces. From there, have we obtained an understanding of the skills currently present among our faculty and among our leadership, identifying what they're lacking and what they need to do next? Remember that we cannot assume, and we pretty much know, that both faculty and leadership do not have all of the skills. And by the way, skills are different from the ability to simply know something, right? It isn't just about knowing. It's about understanding and having the ability to truly implement new strategies. So we need to identify those skills and skill shortages and then make sure that we have a plan and the resources to actually implement professional development in an ongoing method, not one day, not 2 days, but an ongoing process of skill development for those elements that our teachers and leaders need. The third element is incentives. Now, incentives might be going and getting a certification or getting graduate semester units, or it could be pay, or it could be becoming part of the leadership team. Whatever it is, we need to have a plan for incentivizing moving forward. Now, remember that for those of you who are going through classroom observation, teacher evaluation, the threat of punishment, the threat of losing your job can indeed be incentive, but it is not positive incentive. And all of the research around building inequality would say that that kind of threat, that kind of fear, actually works against quality in the classroom. So make sure your incentives are positive. Fourth, we need to ensure that we have both a plan for resources. For instance, the technology requirements for implementing the Common Core standards, a plan for moving around our library materials. For instance, if our 5th grade students are going to have to be reading at an 8th grade level, have we actually moved our library materials around? As well, we need to have a plan for the purchasing of additional resources. We know that those purchases are going to happen. Have we given guidance to our principals or others who control the purse strings? Have we actually trained our federal program directors in the key elements of the Common Core and what they should be looking for? For instance, Title II directors, if they're spending money on professional development, ensuring that that professional development is a part of an ongoing, coherent, consistent program, not just a day here or a day there. Lastly, where are we in the creation of a 36 to 48-month plan that has coherence and consistency and a vision forward? These 5 critical elements define at the leadership level, the district level, where we need to go. So we could evaluate our progress based upon these elements, asking yourself, where are we and what do we need to do next? What element do we need to make sure that we are addressing? Deepening our understanding and becoming a little bit more precise in our evaluation of implementation, we could look at resources like this. If you have never seen this before, you might ask some of the black belts in your district. This is a website from the co-authors of the Common Core Standards, the CCSSO, Council for Chief State School Officers. It's called the Surveys of Enacted Curriculum. It's published in conjunction with the Wisconsin Center for Educational Research, and it was funded by the National Science Foundation. In a nutshell, what it says is it shows us in the various curriculum areas the skills and major topics, and then down to the details of instruction where we should be spending our time relative to Common Core implementation. It goes beyond that, though. It tells us more than just what topics we need to be teaching, what skills we need to be focusing on for our students, but where, across the levels of cognitive demand, of critical thinking, we need to be applying our instruction. This is a critical new element, of course, of the Common Core, and one of those areas where, frankly, most schools and districts are greatly lacking, both in understanding and in implementation. So you can actually map the surveys of enacted curriculum over your actual instructional practice and your curriculum materials to get a sense of where you are in terms of your alignment, both in terms of instructional practice and in terms of the stuff, the materials that are inside of your district. Moving even further into specificity and measurables, I can look at the lexile level, the complexity of my text materials, and the lexile level or the reading ability of my students inside of my district. This is the single most important, specific, and discrete measurable to understand where we are in the implementation of the standards and college and career readiness for our students. So this slide actually shows us the differential between the average complexity of the K-12 curriculum today, that's the low bar, and then the high bar is the average complexity of our stretch curriculum, that is international baccalaureate, advanced placement, etc. On the right-hand side, you see here the text measures for the text on the military entrance exam, workplace training programs. At the bottom, you have, say, working in a department store. At the top, you have the kinds of complex text that you might have to read if you're going to get a job or go to workplace training, say, in a lab, or as an electrician or a steam fitter or plumber. Remember that our students who go into the trades actually have to read in that first year after high school. They have to read more complex materials than students in their first year of Harvard or Yale. So I can measure the complexity of my materials, of my curriculum. I can measure the complexity in lexiles across this graph. And I can see as I migrate, either through purchasing new items or moving items around, or selecting new supplemental materials, or hopefully selecting more real-world nonfiction materials, I can see the complexity measured in lexiles move, develop over time to approach the college and career readiness level. That's the top level. In the same way, because lexiles are vertical scale, they operate P20. They were originally developed by Health and Human Services and then the Department of Education, especially for use in special ed. But they're the only scale that allows me to measure the complexity of my materials and my students' ability to read literally on the same vertical measurement. So I can actually measure my students and their Lexile progressions over time as well. When I do that, I can start to see the student growth. And actually, I can see the students' growth over that K-12 curriculum. And during a school year, I can see the students' acceleration during the school year. So measurement of student growth with Lexiles is absolutely number one, truly critical, but also the measurement of my materials. So where should I be? Where should I actually see my materials change? Where should I see my students' reading growth change? Well, this graph, which actually comes from Metametrics, the creators of the Lexiles, a version of it is included in the standards, and it's been revised in the appendices of the standards just recently. It shows me the historical text measures by grade in Lexile bands, and then it shows me the 2012 Common Core Standards text measures for complexity. So for instance, today in third grade, my materials likely are between that 600 Lexile to 730 Lexile if they are determined to be on grade level. I actually want to make sure that I have a greater range of materials available to my third grade teachers and students. From a 520 Lexile, which you'll notice is actually further below where I would normally be, and that's because it's a recognition actually that many of our students are coming into the third grade, they're behind in their reading ability, they are very likely behind in their listening vocabulary. So I have a broader range both on the lower end but also on the upper end because I want to have my students, by the time they reach third grade, reading at a stretch level of 820 Lexile. Same, of course, is true at fifth grade. Fifth grade under the Common Core, I want to get them to a 1010 Lexile. Today, a 1010 Lexile would actually be something that I would be reading in the 8th grade. So here, I can actually use this graph, this data, to measure whether or not I am getting into alignment for my materials. This would be my materials in my library, my materials inside of my curriculum, maybe in my classroom libraries, and my supplemental materials. But I could also use this scale to measure my students' reading ability and whether or not they are progressing inside of a grade band. For instance, are they progressing in the third grade from a 520 to an 820 Lexile? By the time March rolls around in the third grade, I would want them reading somewhere in the 700s to approaching 800, hopefully. So I can look at that progression. Again, a really critical measure. There's actually no more important measure of college and career readiness in terms of student skill than this, than the student's ability to read. So you're looking to understand where you're at and where you need to go, where you need to focus. Remember, the standards actually begin here by focusing on the student's ability to read complex text. And of course, we get at complex text by reading more nonfiction text, okay? So we want to see, are we approaching 820 in the third grade? When it comes to the fifth grade, today we'd be looking at 730 to 850. We want to see where we are in terms of our progression up to 1010 and onward. Here's another way that I might measure where I'm at today and where I need to go. And that is using any of the ACT tools, any of the ACT benchmark exams. The data in front of you is actually from the 2012 ACT national results that shows us that just over 1/2 of our students met the college and career readiness benchmarks in reading, just under half met those benchmarks in math, less than 1/3 met them in science. But the good news is actually last year we did go up a percentage point, and we believe that part of that movement is because of the increased focus on college and career readiness in our classrooms. You can get this data for your state if you're using any of the ACT tools. You can get this for your students. You can also look at the NAEP data as well. So these are all critical kinds of materials, rubrics, lenses, scales, and then with the Lexiles, very specific measurements that you can and should be using to identify where you are today and where you need to go. Are you behind? Are you on schedule? Are you ahead of the game? I'd now like to move into some very specific measurements using the evaluation matrix for Common Core Standards implementation. This matrix is very specifically aligned to the national pathway for college and career-ready schools. A few things to note. The matrix looks at progress over 4 years. So we look at end of year 1, end of year 2, end of year 3, end of year 4. As well, we look at progress along a scale from emergent practice, I'm just learning or I'm understanding, I'm just starting to actually practice a particular behavior or skill or classroom instructional strategy, then moving to practitioner, then to advanced practitioner, and lastly to mastery or a full measurable action. For all of the elements of the matrix, we do not expect by the end of year 4 that we have reached full mastery for all of them. That would be a fable. That would be a fiction. You just can't move that fast, frankly, in a complex school organization. But we can give a sense of where we need to start, those things that we need to truly master first, and where we should be by the end of year 4. The last thing to note about the matrix before we begin moving into it is that we assume that year 1 here was the 2011 to 2012 school year, because that is the year that most districts began some kind of Common Core state standards implementation. However, if that does not describe your school district, if you are not yet in some kind of implementation pattern, or you weren't in 2011, 2012, it's okay. What we just need to know is that when we're talking about year 1, you're in year 1 now, but it gives you a sense of where you need to get to over the next 36 to 48 months. So let's look at that matrix. Each of these critical elements are elements that you can use to very specifically measure your current implementation progress toward Common Core standards. So first of all, there are really 7 key critical measurements that go across all of the elements of the standards. The first, most important, is looking at our student Lexile scores and making sure that they begin to approach the Common Core state standards requirements. So this is the ability to read. And you'll notice here that we really have to start here. This is our key critical measurement. It's our key critical focus. If we can approach mastery or full mastery by year 4, our students are going to do very, very well on those new assessments, and they will approach college and career readiness. This is the key. In mathematics, it's math fluency mastery. Now, you can measure math fluency because of the way math fluency standards are written. You can actually measure math fluency with your existing traditional assessment items. However, in order to get a sense of students' application of mastery or fluency, you're going to use some other kinds of measurements as well. But you have the tools today to measure fluency inside of those standards. You can also use some traditional kinds of assessments, say NWEA, anything that's criterion reference. But again, these are the 2 critical areas where you want to start your implementation, and you really want to get to full mastery by the end of year 4. You should be looking at your media center circulation. You want to make sure that it's approached the Common Core Lexile and the fiction, nonfiction requirements. Most folks don't really start that until they get into year 2, but we can really get to a very advanced stage by the end of that 48-month progression. So look at your media center circulation. That's really talking about the stuff that's circulating all of your materials in the library. Remember that your library materials become perhaps even more important than your curriculum materials, your core curricular materials, like say a textbook, because the Common Core so focuses on, for instance, in literature that is noteworthy, that is really worthy of reading. And those kinds of books, the Newbery Award winners, etc., the classics we find in our libraries. Also, that focus on nonfiction is very often found in our library resources as well. Next, number 4 here, students should start to exhibit mastery on common English language arts and math assessments across the district aligned to Common Core. Now you might say, well, Kevin, we don't have those assessments. Well, you need them, and you notice it says see below. We'll talk about that, but you really must begin at least in year 2 building them so that by the time year 3 rolls around, you have a common method of seeing into your schools, into your classrooms, actually looking at the students' progress, and the students' progress really aligned to the full complexity of what the standards require and what the new assessments will require. Number 5 is drawn specifically from the 2011 NAEP results for college and career readiness. If we want our students to be ready for college, to be ready for workplace training, to be ready for the new assessments, as a matter of fact, if you study the new assessments, for instance, as we move into the second year, the second cohort of the Black Belt Leadership Graduate Program, we go into a deep study of performance assessments and what they look like in the Common Core. And what you see is that writing is so central central. Well, in order to ensure that our students are on task, are on the progression to where they need to be, they really must be writing 4 to 5 pages every single week. So we need to start that process in year one, right away. We probably won't get to full mastery, and by mastery I mean the various elements of writing to an authentic audience, ensuring that I'm writing using text-dependent questions, higher order thinking skills, appropriate depth of knowledge, evidence-based writing, and also writing to the various forms as aligned to the NAEP. I won't get all of that. It will take me a while, but I can get frequency down. Number 6 is then that students show proficiency on vocabulary, and they start to meet those approaches. They're approaching the Common Core Standards requirement. So here, vocabulary is so critical, and it's speaking vocabulary, listening vocabulary, as well as vocabulary that I use when I'm reading and writing. Remember that our students that are behind, they literally come in with thousands of words that are missing from their listening vocabulary. So there are very specific instructional strategies that we need to employ to get students upwards there, but our students should start to show proficiency on measures of vocabulary. And again, that's really right away. And then lastly, when we survey actual teacher instructional practice. And by the way, we should be surveying that instructional practice on a very regular basis. Most folks don't start that until the second year of implementation, but when we do that, those surveys should begin an alignment with Common Core Standards focus areas. Actually, literally, if you take the survey of enacted curricula, which that's all it is, it's really just surveys of behavior, our teacher behavior should start to progress over time to what the Common Core requires. So these are the core critical measurements that we need to start with. As a matter of fact, if you started just here, if these are the only elements you put on your dashboard, and you started to measure them, you can see I have 4 areas that I need to start right away, or I should have started in year 1. So if I'm in year 2, or I think I'm in year 2 and I'm doing that, I'm perhaps a little bit behind on my progress. I see the areas that I need to start in year 2. I have 2 of those. Then the element that I start in year 3. Okay? Let's move deeper then into district and building leadership development. This is actually the single longest list, if you will, in the matrix. And that is because if you look at any of the research, there's really interesting new research out from the RAND Foundation on the importance of developing our leadership attributes. So what we do here is going to drive change throughout our schools, throughout our classrooms. So let's take a look at the 15 critical areas of leadership development. And I'm actually going to take these from year 1, 2, 3, and 4, okay? So in year 1, it begins with that vision, the vision across the district that really needs to take hold of college and career readiness, articulated as that coherence lens for everything we're doing. We also, if you look at number 8, I have to start building my plan for resources, to have a common district list for resources that I might be getting in my technology plan. My district technology plan needs to be aligned to Common Core resources. I need to have that district library plan for materials. And then I really must begin my training and continue to focus this training over the next 4 years for my federal program and grant officers and team members. And lastly, making sure that my instructional blueprints, we used to call them curriculum maps or scope and sequence, but my instructional blueprints are really revised to the Common Core requirements. All of those in year 1. In year 2, for my leaders then, I move to the critical areas of making sure that I'm doing my skills survey and that I have a plan for developing the skills that are lacking. And that's lacking in both my leadership. My principals may not have these skills as well as my teachers. As a matter of fact, I would point out that the single most effective use of your money is to develop the skills of your principals so that they can coach your teachers. Single most effective use of your money. Look at, do you have your certification programs in place? That could be your black belt programs or other programs. Remember, if you're participating in any of the USC/Institute black belt programs, all of those are created for replication. So you should have those materials. And then the idea is that you're replicating them on your own in your district. You need to then look at your purchasing guidelines and your coherent approach to the resources you're going to start to buy. Starting in year 2, you should start to prepare for purchasing. But really, I mean, even today, as I record these words, we do not have good aligned materials. So your purchasing to Common Core aligned materials are really still a year out, and that would be the 2013 year, year 3. Lastly, you need to start working in year 2. You need to start thinking about your higher education or postgraduate stakeholder type council or collaboration. If you're not, universities, colleges become very important. Also, your parent community communication plan and outreach. And lastly, you really should be using at the level of both district leadership and building leadership some kind of meeting agendas or protocols starting in year 2 to make sure that everyone is continuing to move forward. You've built the initial parts of your plan. By year 3 then, really what's left is starting your evaluation via a criterion-based exam or certification or observation, and then beginning your incentive plan through pay or other kinds of certifications for everybody. These 15 elements provide you with a mechanism to evaluate your own leadership development. So if you want to ask yourself, or maybe you want to use this particular tool with your cabinet, with your district leadership teams, with your professional development leadership teams, and with your building principals. Let's move on. There's another little segment here which is really specifically about our building leadership teams. And I want you to note that there are 4 other critical elements that are identified here. And that is for my building leadership teams, beginning in year 2, I really need to hammer home with them that they need to be able to identify the indicators of Common Core rigor, college and career readiness rigor in the classrooms. Identify it, use observation rubrics, really begin modeling rigorous discussion, rigorous questions, rigorous instructional practices, and they need to be certified in college and career readiness practices. In year 1, most folks are starting their own development with their black belt teams, which is exactly what the National Pathway would say. And that development will continue through time. The black belt teams don't just stop. They continue to deepen, so they are one step ahead. But beginning in year 2, you must begin working with that building leadership team, because they are the coaches that are just around the corner. They're going to provide that ongoing support to teachers. Remember, any one day of professional development that you have, you're only going to remember 10% of it or so. So it's your building leaders getting into a process that actually really move, accelerate, and ensure progress inside of your classrooms. So if you're looking at your evaluation of your principals, where our principal teams are, you want to add these 4 elements. And they go together. They're actually 7 total skills for building leaders, and you can see them here. I would note that there is a grant funded, there's literally free professional development, doesn't cost you a dime on these elements for building leaders. So if you're interested in that, you can contact me, contact the Institute, and we'll get that to you. Let's move then to think about how we evaluate what's actually happening in the classroom with the teacher. You're going to notice here that there isn't a lot that's in year 1. And the reason for that is that in year 1, really, I mean, even for those districts that say, oh, yes, we're implementing the Common Core right now, you know, it's a fiction. It really truly is. You're not implementing the practices. You can think you are, but I can tell you the practices are very significantly different. No one in the first year is actually going to start being able to use the practices in any real way. They have to come to understand them. So the idea that, oh, I changed my stuff, or I sent my people to a training and now they're doing it, or I had them unpack the standards and now they're implementing Common Core, I'm sorry, but that is a fallacy. And if you don't believe me, you can use this rubric. You could use any of the kinds of formative data that we're talking about here, or you could just wait for the test and let it run you over. At any rate, in the classroom, in year 1, the first thing is that our teachers need to be starting their instructional planning process and routines, their approach to instruction, using Common Core aligned requirements. It's the easiest way to start. It's the way to build fluency, the way to build awareness, and the way to build understanding. There are a variety of different kinds of ways you can do this. We recommend the use of very simple paper and pencil type alignment rubrics used every single day or every single week in the classroom. I know that can be controversial in some districts where, very frankly, by law, they aren't allowed to even require an instructional plan. And I don't know what to say to you, except to say that it's the planning process where teachers start their own metacognition for their approach in instruction. But that's the place to begin. So now some of you might find that you're ahead on this rubric, and that's fine. That's great, actually. Because in year 2, I should start to see then emergent practice on almost all of the other elements, which is teachers in the classrooms, they should be able to identify the standards for instruction. Then they should be able to start to write and use text-dependent questions, execute accountable talk in the classroom, write and use higher-order thinking questions and prompts, the Bloom's Q questions, select rigorous content, rigorous supplemental content, more nonfiction, pair nonfiction with their literary content, and allowing for productive struggle, actually approaching the classroom in that way. And by the way, I apologize if I'm using some verbiage here. If you don't understand this verbiage, please do engage your black belt teams. They understand it, okay? That's why they're there for you. And then making sure that I'm using aligned vocabulary. I do want to note the first 3 items, number 1, 2, and 3 here on the classroom or teacher matrix. You'll notice that it is green in year 2 for identifying college and career readiness standards for instruction. And then in year 3, number 2 and number 3, it goes blue and brown. That means I've moved from emergent to I'm really starting to practice. And that is the identification and use of clusters of standards and the rigor indicators. And what this is trying to say to you is that as you're evaluating your progress, remember, the Common Core envisions instruction where we are not identifying and using just one standard. It's multiple standards in a cluster inside of my instruction. In year 2, I'm doing good if I can just identify one standard and I'm becoming acquainted with what's inside of the standards themselves. While I'm doing that, I'm actually developing my skills so that by the time year 3 rolls around, I should be able to start using clusters of standards, and I should be able to identify the rigor indicators in the standards. By the time year 4 comes around, I don't think that we actually approach mastery there, so I didn't put that as mastery, but you can see the progression in the actual use of the standards. By the way, if you don't know this, corepedia.org, that's C-O-R-E, Pedia.org. It's a free resource, and it has the progressions. It's a really great tool for helping your teachers understand how to really cluster the standards together. Remember, the new assessments have multiple standards assessed at one time. That matrix, the matrix 1 through 10, is really across my classroom. So that's the place to begin. If you want to drive into English language arts and mathematics, there are a couple of other items. By the way, the 1 through 10 items, these would be appropriate for science and social studies or other classrooms across the curriculum. In English language arts, I really must ensure that I am achieving the requirements for nonfiction. You might say, well, Kevin, according to the standards, we should be doing those requirements for nonfiction across the school day. And that's true, but I'm getting at nonfiction already in social studies and science and also in my reading and mathematics. So the big shift is what's happening in English language arts, even though it's the entire school that's responsible to meet the entire school-wide requirement. And that's number 1. Frankly, in year 1, if I can simply begin the process of pairing nonfiction with fiction, I'm going to get at what I need to get at to start college and career readiness reading. In year 2, I should be getting into then those other elements of complexity. And here's a red herring, and please be very careful about this. Folks who don't want to change, they don't want to change the literature they're using, they want to keep teaching the novel they've been teaching for the last 20 years, they will hide behind this issue. They'll say, no, our themes are complex enough. Or they'll say, listen, Lexile are not the only method for computing text complexity. There are other methods, and that's true. But by the way, becoming very good at really understanding and measuring reader to task type complexity or thematic complexity, that's going to take a while, and your teachers are not necessarily going to be proficient at it. This is a red herring. It is a way to delay change. We should be getting at that in year 2 because it is more advanced understanding of what complexity is. But you have to do the nonfiction first, and you have to get to the Lexiles. We should also be really starting with the assigning the weekly writing with authentic audience and meeting the writing type targets and requiring evidence and precision. So remember, school-wide, I should start in year 1 with all the writing requirements, but here I'm digging deeper. So by year 2, I should start to see real good emergent practice into the details of the kinds of writing and how I'm implementing my writing with rigor. By year 3, I should be able to actually start evaluating in my classroom all of the elements that I'm doing, from a novice to proficient to mastery, in the same kind of way that the new assessments are evaluating students, and I should be integrating synchronous cross-curriculum topics. By synchronicity, I mean that when, let's say I'm working with the Gettysburg Address in social studies, perhaps I am doing a close reading activity with the Gettysburg Address in English language arts. And then, by the way, in mathematics, I could be doing math problems based upon, they say, the Civil War or what happened at Gettysburg or whatnot in mathematics as well. Let's move to 5 core measures on our matrix in math. In year 1, I should have early, frequent, and consistent focus on the math fluency targets. Hand down, I should understand what the fluency targets are. I should be embedding them from day 1 in year 1. If you're not doing that, you are behind. Please. I should start using Common Core lesson designs based upon the actual assessment clusters and productive struggle methods in year 2. And that would include using mathematical evidence as a part of instruction, also as a part of practice and assessment, and using my modeling and synthesis task, as well as some of the new tools, like the tools out from NCTM. So that's year 2, this year. I should be at a place where I can do those things. If you are not using the math fluency targets, start them now, but also start the year 2 items here. Remember, year 2, we're assuming, is this year. By the time year 3 comes around, then I should be able to synchronize those cross-curriculum topics. So I have 5 additional elements to focus in on in English language arts and mathematics as we look at how I measure where I'm at and where I need to go. All right, so again, the matrix here, you can take these, you can actually use these as discussion points, perhaps in your department head meetings, in the district, in the building. Identify, are you doing them yet? If you are doing them, are you are at a level of just emergent practice? Do you think you're actually at a blue level, which is practitioner? Or are you advanced? Advanced is brown. You know, you really are starting to develop your chops, develop deeper skills, to then the level of mastery. Anyone who believes they're at a level of mastery today, I think perhaps we need to have a critical discussion of what we're using as our rubric there. In the classroom, we can't just talk about the teacher and instructional practice. We also have to talk about observable classroom activities with the student. So here's some of those things that we should be seeing. I would also note that if you are participating in a classroom observation method, a teacher evaluation method, Marzano, Danielson, you should see right here very, very direct alignments, both in the teacher section that I just went through and now in the student section. The students should be engaging in authentic work, which is of personal interest to them. They should be able to choose authentic material and content, authentic subjects that are of interest to them, and then apply. This gets to our higher order thinking skills, synthesis, application, apply the skills that they're learning inside of that personally interesting work. They should be focused immediately when they come into class, and they should actively engage until the bell or transition moment. Now that's a more advanced kind of item. We say that really it's going to take until year 3 to really start to get there, but that we should be starting that. We should have that in front of us. Students should be engaged in active listening and speaking. They should be actively producing new items across all learning tasks on a daily basis. So they should be listening and speaking, reading, and then actually writing and producing new items across all of the learning tasks, all the standards, as soon as possible. Again, these are all targeted to year 2 because it's really not fair to believe that you're going to see these before the teacher is actually getting them under his or her belt. Students should also be engaging in multi-step complex problem solving in English language arts, mathematics, science and social studies, all of the areas of the curriculum with complex multiple outputs and outcomes. Lastly, really as a little bit more advanced item, students have to start to understand that connection between school activity and job or career development. So these are 5 student-centered items. Again, they align directly to those Marzano or Danielson or other kinds of classroom, teacher observation, and evaluation rubrics. And they really round out all of the items here. As a matter of fact, you can use the matrix that you're looking at right now as a matrix for evaluating your own implementation of those kinds of methods. Let's keep moving then. We have our content, our curriculum. So just to kind of recap or pause where we are, and I know I'm giving you a variety of items. You might think, gosh, this is a lot of items if I'm actually evaluating my implementation. Well, you can start with just those first items with my 7 key. But we do have to evaluate what's happening in instruction in the classroom. I need to be evaluating what's happening with my students. Most importantly, I need to be evaluating what's happening with my leadership teams because they're actually leading the change. But I also have my content, my stuff, and I have assessment. So let's look at those. In content, in curriculum, I have some critical elements. Let's look at year 1, 2, 3, and 4. So year 1, that takes me to 7, 8, and 9 here. I should be using strong graphical representation. That's anything from Venn diagrams to the use of picture prompts, number lines, graphs, all of those good kinds of things. Graphical representation, because they engage my higher order thinking skills, graphic organizers, etc. Also, my content should start to include multiple text in English language arts, social studies, even in science, or presentation of math concepts and data in multiple ways. And I should have text and data or data representations that are both below level, on level, and above level for differentiation. Remember that the new assessments, and again, if you don't know this, ask your black belts about it, because the new assessments, they get at this place where I'm reading multiple things and I'm writing to those multiple items. But the things that I'm reading or the things that I'm looking at, some of them are easier, some of them are on level, and some of them are more advanced. I have them across a range, and that is part of my accommodation. It's part of my scaffold. It's part of my differentiation. So I should be doing that right out of the box. And then lastly, the content should provide for a range of student learning within their ZPD, their zone of proximal development, including the new stretch goals. I have to have content that gets at that new stretch level. If I don't, I just don't have enough time to actually move my students forward. Everything else should be beginning in year 2 except for my assessment items. So year 2 would be this year. So if we're not doing this, we need to start it right away. My content has to meet the Common Core complexity requirements based on Lexile, period. Also based on multitask requirements and content standards. My curriculum needs to include embedded elements like prompts for evidence gathering and for precision higher order thinking skills. That's all part of the alignment to Common Core, and the content has to include embedded vocabulary at the Common Core level. You may or may not know that there are actual vocabulary words that have been published that show that alignment to Common Core. They need to be in my curriculum. My curriculum needs to include inquiry-based routines and instructional processes. That gets at that idea of productive struggle. Inquiry-based, it would directly lead to my students having more control, being able to research and work on things that are of personal interest. And the content should be aligned to the latest Lexile measures and the assessment frameworks for mathematics. Lastly, number 10 here, my curriculum and instruction blueprints have to provide a pathway for teachers and students to move from their current skill levels to their final goal level. If you do not have a pathway embedded inside of your curriculum maps, what we now call instructional blueprints for students and teachers, that's a real problem. You really have to do that because you can't just turn this on. You know, we're moving students 2 to 3 grade levels in their ability to read. So that pathway needs to be embedded in how I view my curriculum because I'm starting a scaffold. For instance, just to be very specific here, let's say I have to move my 5th grade students from reading where they are today, which would be in a range, some below 5th grade, some on 5th grade, some a little bit advanced, but I have to get them all to an 8th grade level. How do I do that? Well, this year I might be thinking, okay, I'm going to move my 5th graders enough so they get to year, 6.5.
And I'm doing that not just with my students who are at the 5th grade, but also I'm readying my 4th grade students so that next year when my 4th graders come in, they're accelerated enough that I can actually get them to a level of maybe 7 or 7.5. So at the end of 36 months, as I keep doing this progression, my students by the end of 5th grade, they're actually going to be able to read stuff that's on that 8th grade level. That is a progression. It's a progression in terms of my content, also my instructional strategies. And remember, I can measure that. I can measure that with my students. Of course, 36 months from now, my students who are going to be in the 5th grade are the students in the 3rd grade today. So it all goes together, that vertical articulation. By the way, if you don't know how to do that, there are graduate courses to teach you how to do that. You can get a black belt certification, for instance, in mapping the live curriculum over time in that vertical alignment. The last piece here is integrating depth of knowledge in your curriculum. Excuse me. I wouldn't even try to embed depth of knowledge yet, because depth of knowledge is really going to be defined by the assessment consortia. We're really going to want to do a final revision of our depth of knowledge targets. And they're not going to be done with their real items and item creation until the 2013 school year. So we can wait there. So that was our stuff. That was our content. The last area of alignment, if you're looking at measuring where you're at and where you need to go, is with assessment. And I want to tackle assessment in 2 ways. I have classroom-based assessment. Classroom-based assessment is what the teacher is doing. Okay, it's really where the rubber meets the road. But then I have common assessments, which are assessment activities that happen across the district. So we're going to look at those separately. There are 10 really critical elements that should be happening in the classroom assessment. So in the classroom assessments, I should be able to use, I'm looking at number 1 here, use a Common Core standard chosen for classroom assessment, just one. However, even in year 1, I should start to see some emergent practice in choosing multiple standards within an assessment. And it's interesting, if you look at how teachers learn to use standards, it's actually easier for them to select standards for assessment than it is for them to think about including multiple standards for instruction. Now that might seem like an oxymoron, but it's true, because assessment is a behavior, it's an activity where I'm usually relying on someone else's stuff, other kinds of assessment items, assessment tasks, some kind of test, and end up a quiz, whatever it is. So I'm not actually changing my own practice. I'm just using someone else's stuff. So it's easier to use someone else's stuff and actually do a little bit of clustering than it is to change my own instructional practice. This activity, by the way, actually scaffolds my teacher in meeting the instructional practices, the actual change in instructional methodology in the classroom. So at any rate, number 1 and 2 here, I should start to see those right away, and then developing into proficiency of number 3. And you'll notice that in number 3, by the time 2013 rolls around, I should actually be becoming fairly fluent in my ability to use multiple Common Core standards, college career readiness standards, or clusters, choosing them and using them in combination within an assessment. And I'm moving there, that combination, that's actually starting to mimic what happens on the new assessments, so that I reach a level of fluency, which is number 4 here. By the time year 4 rolls around, I actually have classroom assessments which are focused on evidence of learning using the actual indicators of rigor. The indicators of rigor assume that I have clusters of standards that are aligned with my assessments. So number 1 through 4 here is actually showing you a progression of assessment activity in the classroom. So you can measure where your teachers are in terms of their ability to assess in the classroom. And we should be doing number 1 and number 2 right now, moving into number 3, and then finally getting to mastery of number 4 over time. What else with assessment? Well, in year 1, assessment should include multiple readings or representation of data the same way as my instruction. So that's number 6. I should have been doing it already. If I'm not doing it, please, right away, this should become a policy issue. Also, the next piece is that assessment should be built upon a framework of increasingly dependent complexities. What do I mean by dependent complexities? The way that Common Core or College and Career Readiness Assessment is built is that I begin with easier questions and then progressively harder and more complex questions. The difference here is that those harder or more complex questions, the answers to them actually depend upon what I did earlier. And this isn't just on the same assessment. This would mean that, for instance, my assessment at the beginning, say, of the 5th year, so grade 5, my 5th graders, assessment in the 5th grade in the fall should actually have assessment questions that harken back to the 4th grade and even the 3rd grade. And by the end of my 5th grade year, my classroom assessments should be integrative. They should be spiraling all the way down to elements that I learned at the very beginning of 5th grade, but also going all the way back to 4th grade, because the standards spiral in and of themselves. And if I'm not going back and reaching backwards into those skills and into that content, I'm not going to learn them. Remember, assessment is not about finding out, do I know it? Assessment is a really critical part of my instructional practice. So that's something that I really need to be doing. I should be doing that in year 2. As a matter of fact, that's really the key new focus in year 2, which is this year in 2012. As I move forward then with my classroom assessment, I should be making sure that my actual assessment items are lexiled, the assessments are grouped into daily kind of mini assessments and then weekly written or verbal assessments, and then finally getting into unit or multi-unit based performance assessments and doing performance assessments inside of the classroom. You're not going to get there for a while. We actually target that to year 3. But your teachers should be able to start synthesis performance assessments themselves by year 3. And then finally, by the time I get to year 4, I should have assessments that are in one classroom that are actually connected with content across the curriculum in other classrooms. So again, here are 10 factors. They're factors that are focused on the classroom activity of assessment. And if your students, or excuse me, if your teachers aren't here, it gives you a measure of where you need to go next and really what you need to focus on first. Okay? Lastly, I have common assessment across the district. Common assessments in year 1, in the year 2011, we should have already had common assessments that are synchronized with the curriculum in place, and I should have common assessments that use all of the learning methods, reading, writing, speaking, and listening. If you didn't get there in year 1, it's not a tragedy. You can start, but you need to start now, and you need to really focus on that. Again, we dive into really deep proficiency in performance tasks in year 2 of the Common Core Leadership Black Belt. But in year 1, we definitely are asking our Black Belts to start those processes. Also, as we move into 2012, so that's this year, or year 2, depending on your process, you should be making sure that your common assessments are performance tasks, that they have similar complexity, construction, and nature to those that are in the exemplar tasks from the consortia. That means you're starting to really mimic the level of rigor and design that the consortia are putting out, and that you include common lessons and rubrics for classroom use so that you're actually marrying your performance tasks and your common lessons together. That should be happening right now. Lastly, the real last item for common assessment that we get into in year 3 is that our common assessment should be scored by indicator of rigor, literally by indicator of rigor and depth of knowledge that are inside of the standards. But it takes a while to get there. So if you are not doing any of these, you would need to start focusing on them right away. Maybe you do have common performance assessments you're using across your district. That's great. Let's make sure that we are now building them into performance tasks that are similar in complexity, construction, and nature to those that are coming out from the consortium. So that was a lot, but the matrix that I've just shown you is broken up to be used in discrete segments across your district, across your school building. So you can look at common assessment, you can look at classroom assessment, you can look at the students' behavior in the classroom, you can look at teachers' behavior in the classroom, you can look at your leadership development, your building leader development, and then you have the overarching, really where just to begin as priority, those 7 key items. In summary, if you wanted to put all of that together, all the way back to the pathway and indicators for sustainable change, Lexile, number one, you have to be measuring early and often your students' ability to read, hands down, and marrying that measurement with complexity of your materials. You have to map your materials to real complexity, and that's complexity inside of mathematics and reading, also social studies and science, that aligns to the surveys of enacted curriculum, what the Common Core requires. Mapping to real complexity, like critical thinking. You need to ensure that you are embedding inquiry inside of your instruction. You should have already started that, but that includes having more time for instruction, for instance with the fluency items, also having more focus on critical or areas, getting rid of the stuff that doesn't matter, and going deeper. And going deeper includes those synthesis items like performance tasks and assessments. I should be doing more synthesis through writing and speech. I've given you those NAEP requirements for writing that I should be doing. I should be speaking every week. And then leadership development. Again, all of the research that has been coming out from the foundations say that your most important place to put your money is in that leadership development. And remember, you have to move all of your students who today you believe are on grade level. They are not. They are behind, and they will continue to fall behind if we don't accelerate them very explicitly. A few other ways that you might look at your measurement of progress, right? Where am I and where do I need to go? Am I on track? Am I behind? Well, I just want to remind you of some of the core requirements of the College Career Readiness Standards, the Common Core State Standards. One, I can measure my integration of informational nonfiction text, both in my curriculum and the actual implementation in the classroom. A reminder that Chief 3000 is one of our partners. They participate in the grant program. We can get you teacher resources for free, and they participate if you are new to them. If you don't use them at all, we can actually help you get a reduced fee for their student-centered items, their student program. Text-dependent questions. You need to be implementing text-dependent questions. That's a key measure. That's something that your principals should be able to observe and to model, okay, and to model. Vocabulary is something that you can measure. You can actually create measurements for your students. You can also create observation measurements and rubrics for your teachers. Remember, spellingcity.com is a great place to go. Don't look at your grade level spelling lists at spellingcity.com. Look at the grade level above. The grade level above defines that next level of rigor. Corepedia.org. Corepedia.org is a free resource. It shows you the progressions for understanding. You can measure yourself and your implementation actually by looking at the progressions. For instance, here on the reading for information strand, the progression, here I have standard number 1. You could ask yourself, let's say I was looking at the 3rd grade. Do my students actually implement what's in 2nd grade, which is asking and answering questions like who, what, where, when, and why to demonstrate understanding of key details? Or have they advanced from that and they can ask and answer broader questions now to demonstrate understanding of the full text, and then they're referring explicitly to that text as the basis for those answers? Have they mastered that? Or are they even more advanced? Are they able to refer to details and examples in the text when they're explaining what it says explicitly? So now I've really broadened out. And are they able to draw inferences from that text? So where are we in grade 3? I can use that progression. So corepedia.org, that's free. Also, I can look at my curriculum blueprints, or I call them instructional blueprints, to see, am I actually integrating multiple standards and skills? Do I then link those to the complexity of the content measured in Lexiles, also measured with, for instance, the reader and the task, measuring it with theme, the complexity inside of mathematics? Am I choosing my hardest questions? Do I have a lot of text there? All those things. Then what is the basis for inquiry? Do I have text-dependent questions? Do I have higher order thinking questions like a Bloom 6 question, etc.? And then am I integrating vocabulary? And lastly, am I integrating depth of knowledge? You're not going to get there over time, but if you start a process right now of remapping your instruction to an instructional blueprint, by the time you get to year 2, year 3, year 4, you're going to be ahead because you're migrating your materials. You want your materials to be ahead of your teachers. You can use the recommendations from the writing NAEP as a way to evaluate whether or not you are on track as well. How do I get there? Kevin, you've given me a lot of things. You're asking me to do a lot of things to measure. How do I get there? I would remind you that there are very specific certification programs that can help you across all of these. You have Black Belt in Leadership. Those are year-long courses. We're just beginning our first year 2 cohort going into performance assessments and model lessons. You can get your folks into the year 1. It's not for everybody. It is a lot of reading. It's a lot of research. But you have an enormous amount of materials, and it's designed for replication across your district. The Principals Academy. I actually have that in highlight here because it's really the most important for year 2. School certification for your teachers, your lead teachers and coaches, or even all your teachers. The Black Belt and Cross-Curricular Literacy really focused on the Achieve 3000 tools. Creating Critical Readers. That is a great course offered by Kylene Beers and Bob Probst. You probably know them. They are the rock stars in reading, making sure that our readers are not dependent on their teacher, but really building critical readers and independent readers. Looking at technology implementation in the classroom, that's Common Core technology. And then that Black Belt to curriculum mapping, actually starting that process today, which goes over time to create those instructional blueprints. If you don't have the time or you don't have the money or you're not bought into starting a process like that, you can actually send folks to institutes around the country or regionally. These are 1 to 2 day institutes which actually align to those same processes. What is college and career readiness, to then looking at Socratic practice and productive struggle, then how do I achieve rigor, curriculum and instruction, instructional planning, then getting into writing in the spring, progress monitoring, everything actually leading to a capstone strand throughout the National Conference on College and Career Readiness that goes next June. So you can actually move your teachers or your leaders through that entire process if you don't want to get them into one of the graduate programs. At the end of the day, you know, I'm obviously bought into Common Core Black Belt because I'm senior faculty for it, and I help develop some of those programs with USC. I don't care what you do. The whole idea behind Black Belt that's powerful is it is a process that you need to get your people into, and you need to get them into processes synchronously focused on what they are doing. Help me help you. I'm funded to get free leadership training. I can help you get discounts or free materials, say from Achieve 3000, get you into the right kind of Black Belt program. So Tim Edwards at the Center for College and Career Readiness, Tim actually processes those things. He can send you a little paper that simply asks, you know, what are you interested in, or get you that grant info. Also get you writing the NAEP research, which is really important. The Wallace Foundation has some really interesting research on leadership development. All kinds of free resources by simply listening to my voice here will get you those. So that's a summary of the Common Core Evaluation Matrix tool, which you will get, and then also the other kinds of lenses that you might look through as you're measuring your own implementation. We can also send you the technology evaluation that was created by the assessment folks to help you evaluate whether or not technology is ready, etc. So that's me, Kevin Baird. Any questions, do please email me or email Tim Edwards right there at timedwards@collegeandcareer.org. Okay? Thank you so much for joining us at this special presentation. And if you have any questions about how to measure any of these elements or where you are or what's next, please don't hesitate to email. We're here to help you on your way. Thanks and take care. Bye-bye.